I'm Charlie, and this is Amanda. We're both from Gardenex, the trade association that helps UK companies to export. And we're going to do a presentation about strategies for exporting to the US and Canada. Kind of in the middle of the presentation, I'm going to be having or introducing Mike Darlington, who's from La Hacienda. He just got back from the States only yesterday morning, so he's probably a little bit jet lagged. But he's going to, we're going to have a little session where Mike's had a lot of success in the last couple of years in the US market, and he's going to give us his perspective on ways of getting into the market. And I'm not at all nervous because I've got a US distributor sitting here in the audience, so he could well be picking holes in my presentation. Welcome, Graham and Michelle. This is Graham Kinsman. No, okay, right. So without further ado, I'm just going to talk about, first of all, what we are going to be talking about today. I'm going to give you a quick overview of the size and the scope of the market, and then talk about the potential channels of distribution. I'm going to give you a few examples. There's a guy called, there's the inimitable, wonderfully named Rick Ponce, who's a consultant to the garden center trade in the US, and he talks about 28 channels of distribution. But I'm just going to highlight a few of the ones that most UK companies adopt. And then we're going to talk about key players and market info, and then Amanda's going to go through some of the sources of information and the ways that we can help UK exporters, and then a few general tips on exporting to the States. So without further ado, I'm going to kind of blast through some of these slides. There's a lot of market information here, but anyone from the UK who wants a copy of the presentation and things, you can contact me afterwards. So the US is a big market. In terms of size, I think it's 38 times the size of the UK, population of 316 million, and the area has an area more than twice the size of the whole of the EU. And I think it's states like Oregon and Michigan that are closest in size to the whole of the UK. And a state like California has an economy the equivalent of the 8th largest country in the world. And you've got some players like Home Depot and Lowe's, the big DIY stores, that between them have over 4,000 stores. So they're huge inside. And TSC is for the Tractor Supply Company. It stands for Tractor Supply Company. Incidentally, they don't supply tractors. But they have about 1,400 stores. They're kind of an equivalent of what we would call our country stores, I guess, big chain. And it has been estimated that there are around 15 to 16,000 garden centers. 16,000. Okay. So it is a huge potential market, but how do UK companies potentially get to it? Quick look at some of the market trends. It went through a few difficult years, and there have been various trends in the climate. I mean, particularly at the moment, California is suffering from lack of water, and there's lots of water restrictions. But other areas have been suffering from too much rain in the past. But there are some strong trends. The whole grow your own and edible gardening trend has been particularly strong in recent years. And I know we had Joe doing a presentation from Veg Truck. He's one company that's particularly benefited from that trend and seen a lot of growth in the market. Some of the other trends are things like staycations, with people staying at home and perhaps not traveling so much. Outdoor living has always been strong. At shows like the Hardware Show, you see a lot of grill-related companies, outdoor barbecue. And tailgating is not driving too close to the car in front. It's actually going and having a good time, whether it's a baseball game or watching an air show. And now I'm even more nervous because there's a former US buyer who's going to come and heckle me. And good afternoon, Frank. Yes, last year there's something called the National Gardener Association, which last year's annual survey of consumers showed the highest increase in the last century. But unfortunately, I think this year they showed a decrease, which was even bigger. But I'll come on to more market figures later. And I just like the phrase frugal fatigue, so I always put it in there, the signs of the economy turning the corner. Okay, so who are your potential customers in the US? I'll start with a few of the key categories where a lot of UK companies get some success, and that's mail order companies or the web shops. A lot of these guys are used to importing goods from the UK. Gardener Supply is one of the companies that have done a lot of that over the years, and Kinsman have also been involved in internet sales. But there are a number of companies out there. I've just quoted a few examples, but it depends what kind of product category you're in. If you're selling environmentally friendly products, there are quite a few companies focused on that, or hard to find tools, all those kind of things. And some of the big ones have European buying offices. And of course, you have the likes of Amazon, and there's Wayfair, Williams-Sonoma, and a lot of the big retailers like Walmart, Home Depot, and so on are selling a lot of their product through their internet sales side. And again, referring to Rick Ponce, he always claims that it's easier to get into the big guys such as those through their mail order arm than it is to try and sell through the actual retail outlets. Yeah, we'll move on now to the garden center side of things. One thing that always strikes me about the US, yes, there are thousands and thousands of garden centers there, but there are actually no real national chains. Most of the garden centers are regionally based, maybe even just around one metropolitan area. The largest is Armstrong and Pike, which is, well, Armstrong was based in California, Pike in Texas, and Armstrong bought Pike a few years ago. Is it Texas or Georgia? Atlanta, Georgia. And yeah, but between them, they only have 47 stores when you compare that with garden centres in the UK, like Wyvale in the UK or Dana in Germany or whatever, who have over 100 stores. It's still, for such a big market, it's low numbers. So again, for UK companies, it's how can you serve all these small independent garden centres that are scattered across such a huge country. One point I always highlight is landscaping is important for many garden centres in the States. If you go to cities like Chicago, there's one of the best garden centres there is Chalet Nursery. Well, I think over 50% of their business is actually through landscaping, their landscaping side, rather than from the retailing. So how do you reach these garden centres? One of the usual ways is to work through some kind of distributor or wholesaler distributor stock and market your products. They will often attend the national and wholesaler shows, and it has to be said there are a lot of shows in the States covering garden and garden-related products, and there are a lot of wholesaler shows which represent a lot of investment and time and in money in exhibiting at them. The advantage of a distributor, they often arrange a lot of the logistics, the delivery, the invoicing, the sales support, and so on. One of the big sectors, again, going back to the landscape sector, the grower landscape sector, there are a number of specialist wholesalers who deal in that sector, and I've quoted a few examples. And you have a few of the distributors who perhaps focus more on UK suppliers. There's companies such as Bosmere Inc. and Tierra Derco, who exhibit at the National Hardware Show. And then you have the wholesalers. There are some huge organizations such as Ace Hardware, Do It Best, and True Value, who have thousands and thousands of members. They're actually, a lot of them are independent. And again, they have their own in-house shows, and if you want to get into those organisations, you will have to spend a lot of time and money committing to getting involved in their events. Likewise with the likes of Barrett, L&L Supply. In fact, I think Mike has just come back from the Barrett show. I mentioned Kinsman, and Graham and Michelle are here. And then you also have things like garden centre buying groups like Master Nursery, which I think it's at least 500 members that they claim to have. But again, they're independent garden centres, and so there's little actual central warehousing and central buying. Then you have the big guys, the mass merchandisers like Walmart, Target, and Costco, where price is the main issue. And then, again, referring back to Rick Ponce and his 28 channels of distribution, there are all these different kind of companies like feed and seed stores, gift shops, and things which might handle garden products. But I think at this stage, I'll draw in Mike from La Hacienda, who, as I say, has just arrived back from the States. I think you've been to the States about 4 times this year. 5 times this year. So Mike, I don't know if you want to say a few words about how you've tackled the market. You've grown an awful lot in the last couple of years. How did you approach the market originally, and what things have changed for you as you've...
The first thing we did was we went to the National Hardware Show with a grant from Gardenex. So that was just to explore the market. And basically we took what they would call in America, it's all old money in America, so it's a 10 by 10 booth, it's all in feet and inches. So we took a 10 by 10 booth and just took posters with us to show our range off to see if there was any interest in it. And we did that in our first year, and we've been back twice since with product. So we understood that customers were interested in our product, and then we took the product to them. The most important thing in the American market is the route to market. And you need to understand how is best for your product to get to market. So the ideal, the obvious, would be to go with one of the big boxes and hopefully sell them hundreds of containers, and you make your millions and you can go off and retire. It ain't as simple as that. Lots of the big boxes will want you to go online first. A lot of the big boxes will want you to own the stock in the US. And if you are successful online, then they will take it into store. When it goes into store, it is very heavily discounted. It's a very, very competitive market. And all the big boxes, like in Europe, they want to be the cheapest. So a caution there is, do watch out. They will devalue the product, and it does have the risk of devaluing the brand in the end. We have decided that we will go online, but we're not going into stores with our brand. It would discredit the brand in the market. So we've been in America for 2 years trading. We've gone from nothing to in excess of 2 million in 2 years, and we've changed our strategy 3 times. Our strategy first was to go with a distributor, and we got some great help from Amazon. There was Amazon wanted our product, like they want the whole catalogue online straight away, which is just not possible, but they do push us that. But they did help us, and we went over to Seattle and we spent some time with Amazon, and they gave us a distributor to work with, and it was Jensen Distribution on the West Coast, and that was our first start in the US. We then realised that you can't distribute in the US from one distributor on the West Coast because the US is just so big. So again, through a meet the buyer session at Gardenex, we hooked up with a company called Barrett, and we started to work with them. And things were progressing quite well, and within 12 months we were well over £1 million. But then it just sort of stuck there, and we weren't doing a lot more. We investigated the market and understood a little bit more about distributors, and we thought, well, hang on a minute, these distributors, let's use Jensen as an example, they're on the West Coast, they do probably 1/3 of the states in America, but they have 65,000 products. 65,000 products in their warehouse. So our 32 products was quite a way down the list. And that's why when they're at their shows, we show the product, we had great sales. And when I came back to the UK, it just stopped. Because their reps go out into their 20 states, and they sell their big products where they're getting a lot more commission, and the products where the American companies have got reps on the ground supporting the distributor reps, giving them incentives and driving the business forward. So whenever I was at a show, our sales would go through the roof, and then I'd come back to the UK and it would just fall. The other thing with distributor shows as well is they are revenue generation schemes. They're very expensive. For a 10 by 10 booth at a good show like L&L, you'll pay something in the region of $10,000 to $15,000 for a 10 by 10 booth for 3 or 4 days. Now, if you do go with a distributor, do negotiate. So first year, we just paid the money because that's what you do. You pay the money because you want to be in America because that's where the land of opportunities is. In the second year, I said to the distributors, I'll come along, but I'm not paying for the booth. I need a 20 by 10 to show off our products properly, but I'll pay when you place an order for a container. And it worked. We all went along with it, and that's what we did, and it worked rather well. But again, when I came back to the UK, the sales dropped and nothing happened. So we've decided now that we're going to go with a sales and marketing company who are going to represent the Hacienda, and they have got 4 other UK brands, and the maximum they will ever have will be 6 or 7. That will be it. They will represent no more brands than 7. So we've got a sales and marketing company covering the whole of the US with stock in 2 warehouses of our products. So that should give us good distribution. We've been doing that now for about 3 months, and sales are very, very good. I've met the rep companies, and they seem to be very good. And I go to their sales meetings to advise them of new products and just to chat to the guys and get the feedback from what they're doing on the ground with their customers. And typically their customers are distributors, so it will be L&L, it will be Barrett, it will be Jensen, etc. And that is working very well for us. What we're doing to support the sales and marketing companies, all the big shows, I'm going over to support them and give additional training to those guys. So, as Charlie said, last week I was at the Barrett show, supporting the guys there. In 2 weeks or 3 weeks' time, I'm going back to the L&L show, and I'll support the guys there. And in between, they're doing some of the smaller shows. So they'll do some of the co-ops like True Value, they'll do the ACE show, so they will be doing shows whilst we're not there as well. So that is the route to market that we're taking at the moment.
Okay, that's excellent. Excellent summary of how La Hacienda has achieved some success. I think, Mike, are you going to hang around a few minutes if anyone wants to have a word with Mike after the presentation? And now I'm going to hand over to Amanda, who's going to go through some of the sources of information that we provide to help you find potential customers in the US and Canada.
Good afternoon, everyone. Mike has very clearly laid out how, when you tackle any market, you have to find the best route for you, but also you've got to stick with it and adapt your strategy if you need to. What we're about as Gardenex is to provide the background sources of information, the contacts. We have many years' experience of helping exporters. Charlie has actually been with 2 very well-known gardening export companies in the past, so he's actually been at the sharp end and knows what exporters go through to try and get their products successfully into a new market. The sorts of sources of information that seem quite pedestrian but are actually very useful are things like our sources of trade magazines. At every international show we go to, and we go to very many of them, we collect magazines and catalogues. For the States, we collect copies of IGC Retailer, Garden Chic, Today's Garden Centre, and Casual Living. We also subscribe to the NGA survey in the States, which has packaged facts. It has the Casual Living Powerhouse 100. It's a very American way of describing the top people in the States and the top products, a chain store guide, etc. So if you want this kind of background information, the Gardenex reference library has those to hand, and you can call on us for those. We attend an awful lot of trade shows. Some of the ones that we are aware of in the States and have information on or attend ourselves are the National Hardware Show, which, as its name suggests, is for the hardware market, but also covers a very large gardening section. And we've taken a group of British exhibitors there for many years. We also visit the IGC show. There are now 2 of those, one on the east and one on the west coast. A lot of independents visit there, but some distributors are also taking booth space there. The Atlanta Gift Fair, and as Mike and Charlie have mentioned, there are a lot of regional shows and specialist product shows as well, which you need to actually evaluate. The wonderfully named Ricky Pons Smarty Ponts newsletter, and it always makes me smile, is actually a very useful source of up-to-date trend information and facts about the market. Gardenex also has a US lawn and garden report, the last updated I think in 2014.
Yeah.
Now this is something that we compile and we use all our contacts. We use the experience of our exporters who've been successful in the market. We use our contacts and good friends who we've known for years in the market, such as Graham and other companies. The report, which is available to all Gardenex members, includes over 200 records of garden centres, distributors, home centres and wholesalers. We also, over many years of working with exporters, we were founded in 1961, have built over 11,500 company records, and these are all buyers of lawn and garden products worldwide. We can actually provide you with a tailored list of these if you wish to have distributors in the States. We can actually sort through our records and actually give you those and all the background information on those companies. Very modest cost, but it helps you get into the market. We also have in our reference library directories, and as well as the trade magazines already mentioned and show directories, we also have company catalogues. So for instance, if you are interested in the mail order catalogue market, we do find that we have in our records many of the company's catalogues, so you can get a feel for what style of products they're looking for. And most important of all, because this is the lawn and garden sector, and with the best will in the world, general export advice is brilliant, but specific market advice is really invaluable, is that we can provide export advice, tips and information, ways in which your products can best reach the market. And it is different for almost every exporter. So you have to tailor your approach as to what your product range is and what your aims are as well. And many is the company that we've actually met who started out contacting us and saying that they want to sell in the big boxes, and we try and redirect them from that. That is not the best way to go. Start small, start carefully, and then adapt your product and your range as you succeed in the market. We also run individual consultancy sessions, so if you want to find out what your product might do in the market or where it might lie, then we'll be able to advise you. So it's well worth a visit to our offices in Braested, and then we can actually understand what your aims are and your ambitions are and try and help you. In terms of trade shows, Charlie's already mentioned, and so have I, the National Hardware Show. It's a really good source of information. You do meet a lot of the key buyers there. You can also get a very good feel for the merchandising that happens in the States. It's really a whole different market. We may speak a common language, but our cultures and styles can be quite different, and you have to understand that, because what you want to do is actually work with the way of the culture of the country you're exporting to. The National Hardware Show next year is May the 4th to the 6th, and we will be taking a British group there. We also can offer UKTI funding in the form of cash grants for exhibitors who are eligible. We support every exhibitor at that show, every show we take a group at, with previews which we send out to the press and to key buyers. We do press releases as well, and I think last year Charlie was on television being interviewed. You can ask his autograph later. And we also provide practical advice and help during the show. We're there with you at the show. So anything you need, anyone you want to ask about, anyone who visits your stand that you don't know, then ask us. And if we don't know, we'll find out for you. The Independent Garden Centre show, as I mentioned, and now IGC East. Very interesting shows, a lot of independent retailers, as I said, visit there, and we actually offer a 10% discount to exhibit if you're a Gardenex member. And there are many, many more. One of the things that you can do by asking us is find out which show is right for you. There are gift fairs, casual furniture shows, there's the NLGS, which is a kind of speed dating distributor show. You know, and one of those will be right for one of you, and the other will be right for another.
Okay. So how can we help you find new business? Well, we've talked about already about the database and the market report. We hold regular Meet the Buyers events, and these have sometimes featured buyers from the US. We've had Arret, Bosmia Inc., World Source Partners, and indeed in the past, Gardener Supply. And the most recent one was in July when Lee Valley Tools, one of the leading Canadian retailers and mail order companies, attended. We talked about things like the Gardenex library and the consultation. We also, as Amanda's mentioned, we visit some trade shows so that we get a feel for the market, identify distributors, essentially, if you've got any inquiries about market research, contact either my colleague Eleanor or myself. Don't forget there's support that you can get through UK Trade and Investment. There's various services that they offer. Their so-called everything's acronyms with UK Trade and Investment. There's their so-called OMIS reports, which you can commission. There are increasingly, they're doing a lot of webinars online, and some of these have been related to companies such as Amazon and some of the e-retailers in the States. It's always worth looking out for those. We advise members of webinars that we think are most relevant to our sectors, garden and pet sectors. And finally, don't forget about Canada. Canada's quite a good hunting ground for UK companies. Its population is 38.7 million, so much smaller than the US, but not an insignificant amount. Canada covers a huge area. So you get a lot of regional distributors and regional operators. Yes, it has a cold climate and a shorter season, but there are the strong UK links, and places like British Columbia have a climate which is more akin to ours. I used to work for a hobby greenhouse company, and we sold far more greenhouses to British Columbia than we did to any other part of Canada. Some of the big players there are the likes of Home Depot and Lowe's, but you also have some homegrown retailers such as Canadian Tire and Rona and so on. Mail order, I mentioned Lee Valley Tools, who were with us in June. Vases Seeds, John Barrett was here yesterday from Vases. They source from a number of UK companies. And there are some of the distributor regional wholesalers, and I mentioned some of the names there. Just a few final tips. I think we're running out of time anyway. Yes, Amanda mentioned the two countries divided by a common language. There's all kinds of terms and things which are totally different in the States. I shan't mention some of the more rude ones, but I got confused with people would talk about the holiday season, so I thought that I naturally assumed that was all about summer and vacations and things, but holiday season is all about the period. I think kind of from Thanksgiving through to Christmas, that kind of area. So if people talk about holiday season in the States, what we're talking about, they talk about vendor rather than supplier, but there's loads of other examples. Don't forget that it's not necessarily just English that you might need on your packaging and on your promotion. There's a huge Hispanic community in the States now, and if you go into, I remember going into a Home Depot in California and picking up a batch of their promotional leaflets only to discover they're all in Spanish. And of course, if you're in Canada, in Quebec, it's French, which is the language of choice. Don't forget to have your country of origin on both your invoices and packaging. Product liability is a big issue in the States, particularly in some product areas. So there's a lot of advice. Again, UK Trade and Investment have an excellent publication dealing with that. It's very competitive pricing. You have the dollar stores and the mass merchandisers that I mentioned. As Amanda mentioned, everything is in imperial measurements, and indeed, standard paper and business card sizes are different to the UK. And for certain product areas in gardening, for instance, it's seeds, you will actually have product regulations that you need to meet by state. There's different regulations from state to state. So that was a whirlwind tour of the US and Canada. Thanks a lot for Mike's presentation. And if you've got any questions about the US and Canadian markets, please come and see us. We're next door at the International Buyers Centre. Thank you very much.